Everyone, welcome. Welcome, Flipsters. It's really cool to be here. My name is Parmesh. I do a bunch of things. I run the Godrej India Culture Lab in Bombay. I'm an author. I help edit a fashion magazine. But I'm primarily here as a Henry Jenkins fan. And so it's a pleasure to introduce Henry to all of you. We've been hosting him for the past month at Godrej and at our lab, taking him around the country and just trying to give him a taste of India so that he comes back. And it's been an absolute pleasure and delight to bring him to you. In fact, we messaged Benny, and Benny was like, of course, we come and speak here because, at Flipkart can learn so much from Henry's wisdom and expertise, especially because a lot of us in this room are engineers and MBAs. And what Henry talks about is digital from a humanities perspective. So I think that just looking at the same phenomenon from a different angle will mean us. Henry has done a bunch of things in his crazy life. He's written 17 books, which will become 19 in the next couple of months. He's spent a large part of his life at MIT in the comparative media studies department, which he founded. He's the founder of many branches of knowledge, like fan studies, for example. So he's the person who made the studies of fandom legitimate and cool in academia. But he also has these other hats, whether it's in business, whether it's in entertainment, in devising, and then exploring concepts like convergence culture, transmedia entertainment, and so on. And also in education, whether it's in really thinking about the future of education through projects like the MacArthur Foundation and so on. He's on a bunch of boards, including, say, Peabody, for which he's one of the team that announces the awards. And he's got friends literally across the world, ranging from everyone in Hollywood to everyone in New York and advertising, and of course some people in academia as well, and now all of us here in Bangalore as well. So it's a pleasure. This is, the way we've designed this is Henry will talk a bit, and then we'll have questions from everyone. And I think we're beaming this to everyone in all the other offices as well, so welcome virtually. And so yeah, thank you for the first time ever in Bangalore, Professor Henry Jenkins.
Thanks, Bert. So, good afternoon, Flipsters. I'm happy to have a chance to talk to you. And as Parmesh said, I've pride myself on going where no humanities professor has gone before, and trying to have conversations at the intersection of business, technology, culture. As I've been traveling around MBA programs here in India, I've quoted often this line that's been ascribed to Peter Drucker: culture eats strategy for lunch. And I find that a useful way to think about what the dialogue needs to be as we think about a period of rapid cultural change that's being brought about by technological shifts, and that in turn informs business shifts. So some years back, I visited Kleiner Perkins in Silicon Valley, the major VC, and asked them what they support. And they said that they really look for three people on a team. Someone who understands the technology really well and knows how it's going to change the world. Someone who has the business model and knows how to make money from that technology. And the third is the culture person who understands who's consuming it and how that technology is going to fit into the context of their lives. And so what I try to do is represent that third area of expertise in conversation. So this first picture captures a little bit of what I'm going to talk about, of a participatory culture. This picture is circa 1928, 1929, someplace in a movie theater in America. They're part of the Mickey Mouse Club. So Walt Disney has just started his animation studio. Walt Disney's less than a year old at this point. Mickey Mouse is less than a year at this point. And he begins to create these events all over the country where supporters of Mickey Mouse go regularly to see Disney movies, to participate in group activities, sing songs, crafts, so forth. And it becomes a kind of affiliation with that company that exists because people are not simply consuming Disney products, but they're actively participating in defining what Disney is going to be. 30 years later, the Mickey Mouse Club becomes a TV show in the early age of television in the US, and later one with Britney Spears and a number of sort of pop stars come out of the later Mickey Mouse Club. And as a grassroots organization to get fans connected to a media company. So what I'm going to talk about today is the big change. And really, if we think about it, there have been 4 major shifts in human communication across history. The first is a shift from oral communication to written language. The second is the rise of print. The third is the rise of mass media. And the fourth is the digital revolution. Right? And each profound and prolonged processes that impact every other aspect of our lives. But if we think back at the others, it took about 100 years or so for the full impact of those revolutions to be absorbed, understood, fully processed by the culture. Right? And even if we say we're speeding things up in the 21st century, we still are only 15 or 20 years into the digital revolution that is going to impact everything that's in our lives. And so we're at a transitional moment, a disruptive moment still. People talking about the wild, wild west, and I've heard this town described as a wild, wild west frontier town still, as digital industries are coming in and buildings are springing up out of nowhere. But we're really, we've goes before we fully understand the implications of it. Now, at the heart of the change, I think, has been a dramatic shift in access to the capacity to communicate. Who can produce and circulate culture? And that, in turn, impacts power and the distribution of power, wealth, and the creation of value within a society. So I'm going to talk about 4 big ideas in the talk. And the first one is that the change we're at right now is about participation, not interactivity. So if we think about the first decade of the digital revolution, much of the talk was about interactivity. Interactivity is about the technology. Is a technology program? The second phase has been about participation. That's a social, cultural process. What do people choose to do with the technology once they have their hands on it? So if we think in gaming terms, Super Mario Brothers was all about interactivity, right? I hit a button, I run around really fast, I bounce my head against some bricks, coins shower down, I pop on a bunch of turtles, I do loop-de-loops, and I end up beating some boss, and I win a bunch of gold stars, right? But nothing I'm doing there, while I can do that well or badly, nothing I'm doing there wasn't designed by, the game company. Shigeru Miyamoto helped create that game and had determined what the verbs were, what the actions that I was capable of doing in that game. If you turn that and think about Minecraft, right, then you understand what participation looks like, right? And Minecraft allows us to set our own goals, to design our own things, to participate in larger communities, to learn each other. The whole culture grows up around Minecraft, and that's a culture of participation. All right, so if we think in broad strokes about the changes that affect culture over the last 200 years, and it's going to play out differently in the US than in India, there will be some differences, but painting in broad strokes, the 19th century, we have a thriving folk culture of grassroots producers of cultural materials, right? People are making culture. Here these women are making a patchwork blanket, right? And they're quilting and embroidery traditions here in India as well. My grandmother would have been one of those women in the late 19th century growing up in the American South. She would have learned how to make the blanket from the other village women. It would have been a set of techniques passed on from one generation to the next. The blankets in this case were not industrial. They were made as gifts. So the community would give a blanket as a gift to a young mother, a widow, someone who just got married. They're kind of expressions from the community to the community. But the raw material of the blanket comes from the Industrial Revolution, right? Near where she lived were textile mills. And the textile mills were making cloth. Scraps of cloth left over from the industrial production of textiles goes into the production of blankets, right? So we can think of this as folk culture as a model. decentralized, more and more individualized. All right, the next step then is what we're at right now, which is what I call participatory culture. And participatory culture is culture that builds off our ability to take advantage of this easy access to means of cultural production and circulation. Now, I want to call this a more participatory culture because clearly many, many people around aren't at the point where they have that kind of access, right? The world's not flat, there are gross inequalities, but the direction we're moving toward is one where more people than ever before create and share culture. So here we see these young Japanese fans of anime in Tokyo dressed up in costumes they made themselves, inspired by mass media content. So just as the raw materials of the folk culture that made the patchwork blanket was industrial produced fabric, the raw materials of the modern participatory culture is often mass media. So we're taking mass media content, remixing it, restitching it, creating something new. And that's how why fandom, I think, becomes emblematic for lots of the other kinds of behavior we're seeing emerging in the suddenly becomes a place to study because it's been doing this longer than most other communities. Now, in a world dominated by where participatory culture is more and more visible, we're reacting to a world of mass media that tends to talk over people, right? And since I've been here in India, I've heard about this guy Arnab, who's famous for talking over his guest, but also talks from a broadcast position over the audience, right? We can't hear ourselves because of the Arnabs and the O'Reillys and sort of loudmouth representatives of broadcast media that are having this effect. I met him the other day in Mumbai. He seemed kind of a nice guy off stage, but clearly on stage he's a little different. So but what we can do now in this era of participatory culture is we can remix Arnab. See, I think we can remix Arnab. Oops. Or maybe not. All right, well, it doesn't seem to want to play at the moment, but we can, what I have here is a remix audio track where someone takes his never, ever, 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 ever speech and mashes it up, manipulates it digitally, and puts it back in the circulation. And so when I talk to companies around the world, they're worried about losing control in this age of participatory culture. And the bad news, or good news, depending on your perspective, is you guys lost control a long time ago, right? People I study can take media you produce and distribute and do with it pretty much what they want. And you can stop some of them, but you're not going to stop all of them. So rather than thinking about regaining control, the advice is about how to get back in the game, how to be part of the conversation that the culture is having. All right. So big idea number 2 is about that. If it doesn't spread, it's dead. What is it like to create media and share media and sell media in a world where the public now plays an increasingly central role in how media circulates? So let me start by making this distinction between circulation and distribution, which is the heart of a book I published a couple of years back called Spreadable Media. So distribution is the way culture has traditionally rolled out in an age of mass culture, right? So some corporate decision maker says, this book, Harper Lee's got a new book out. We're going to make it available for sale in the US and UK and India on the same day, same hour. And it's going to flow through the pipes of a company like Flipkart. Or a network says, we're going to make the show available in the US 6 months after it's opened in the UK. Or Ant-Man, does it open the same day in India and in the US? These are decisions of distribution, corporately controlled. Circulation is now partially a grassroots question, right? How does media travel in a world where we have the capacity to take media and move it from place to place, where we expect media where we want it, when we want it, how we want it, and we're willing to take it there illegally if it's not going to be available there legally? That's the system of circulation as we currently understand it. Now, a lot of people have tried to understand that in terms of viral media. And the word viral media literally makes me sick, right? It's a metaphor of infection. It seems to me a way that people who have always controlled media maintain the illusion they're still in control by saying, we'll design a killer virus, maybe we'll hire some expert to make something go viral for us, and we will just force people to share that with each other unknowingly. So this is Neil Stephenson, the science fiction writer, talking about the idea of viral media. He's one of the first people to use that metaphor. And he said, we're all susceptible to the pull of viral ideas like mass hysteria, or a tune that gets in your head that you keep on humming all day to spread it to someone else. Jokes, urban legends, crackpot religions, Marxism. No matter how smart we get, there's always that deep irrational part that makes us potential host for self-replicating information. So how many ways do they strip aside control of the public in the acts of communication here, right? They're susceptible. It's mass hysteria. It's a virus. It's stuck in our head. It's irrational. We're host of self-replicating information, right? Again and again. Not the way we experience media in life, right? Every day I get more pieces of media coming in my inbox than I can possibly watch. I make a decision right away, which ones do I actually watch? And if Parmesh, who knows me and my taste and interest well, sends me something, I'll watch Parmesh's video today. I may not watch something that comes uninvited in my mailbox. And then I'm deciding, is this worth anything? Can I do anything with this content? Is it worth passing along to someone else? If so, who? Through which channels? With which message attached? Within the context of which conversation? And all of those decisions made individually and collectively now impact how ideas travel through the society, help to shape the cultural, political, economic agendas of a society. And so a smart company attaches themselves to that in one way or another. So here's a smart company, the Oreo cookie company. Right? The American Super Bowl is on television, the biggest ad event of the year. The major people have paid millions and millions of dollars to get airtime for the Super Bowl. In the middle, the power goes down, and everything goes black. And Oreo, in 10 minutes' time, the 10 minutes the power is down, creates this ad and spreads it through Twitter. And it gets more visibility and more discussion the following day than all of the expensive ads produced by major brands at the Super Bowl. Because it's so on target, right? It's so responsive. We look at that and go, someone had the guts and the power to send that out without 15 layers of approval, right? Think about what 10 minutes takes to it takes 20 minutes to slap that together, right? You didn't have any time left to get the guys over you to say yes to that. So it's real, but it so fit into the conversation of the people that it's something people continue to use as a case in business school and so forth today. So this is content for an age of spreadable media. Here in India, these guys get it. Right? I talked to AIB shortly after I arrived here, and they're doing incredible things with comedy to use comedy as the way into a grassroots circulation through social media of political discussions. Right? Sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes people in power get angry at them, but when they hit it right, whether it's about rape and the excuses men use for raping women, or if it's about net neutrality or whatever, their videos travel at extraordinary speeds across. And when I talk to MBA programs across the country, students instantly recognize who these guys are and know the content we're talking about. So that's content production in an age of spreadable media. We met with these guys, Culture Machine, in Mumbai, who have an incredible analytics engine that is on top of trends worldwide in social media, quickly identify trends, have a production team that produce videos, localize these trends for the specifics of different markets in India, and the result is something that's really very. So I'm, being a Batman fan, was very interested in this video that they showed me of Batman in Chennai. And my clips are not playing again. Okay, we are going to skip clips today. Okay. All right, so that brings us to big idea number 3. The big idea number 3 is what travels through social media. It travels for multiple reasons. I've already hinted at some. But what travels because it's both personal mythology, that is, we chose elements of media to express something of ourselves, and because it's social currency, that we use media to connect with other people. That media becomes a resource we use in our communication with each other. So this is the picture I have as my profile on Facebook right now. It was taken just after I arrived in Mumbai. I go to a British toy store. There is a life-size statue of Captain America. And it's the first American I'd run into in India. Right? I don't know about you. You're traveling overseas. Suddenly people come from your country. You feel like you're long-lost friends. Right? I wouldn't spend my time with Captain America in the US, but here in India, yeah, sure, we're going to hang out together. Right? I wash up, and I do this sort of gesture behind his head. It's called bunny ears. It's kind of an act of friendly disrespect, if that's not a contradiction in terms. And it means something because I'm a comics fan, because I'm an American, and because we're both about to be run over by this massive Mumbai bus being driven by a crazed teddy bear driver. Right? All of that context matters. Right? And so some of that's personal, some of that's social. We add on that then the rainbow flag. Right? And so not long after I arrived here, the US Supreme Court announced that marriage equality was the law of the land in the US. And I was deeply proud, as I think many of my friends are, of that decision. And so we started, people change their Facebook picture, right? And so gay people, lesbians, but also heterosexual couples, heterosexual parents with kids, just as a sign of support and respect for the consequence of that decision. Now we're at that point where people are sort of now, how long do I keep it up? Right? When I change it back, does that mean I no longer value marriage equality? You don't want to be the last guy in your social group to leave it up, because then you look like someone who left their Christmas tree up too late or something else, right? It's kind of negotiation going on right now. But the rainbow flag itself is this mixture of culture and politics, because it goes back to The Wizard of Oz, the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, to Judy Garland, who was one of the first Hollywood stars to be strongly in support of gay rights in America in the 1950s, to a time when one of the code names for being gay in America was Friend of Dorothy. Right? So that rainbow flag is both a fan artifact and a political gesture. So we look at this Facebook picture, it's actually a very complex thing, right? Lots of things are going on in it, and any of those could trigger a friend seeing it on Facebook deciding to pass that along to someone else. So this is where culture gets very complex. Now, when I arrived in India, one of the students at one of the first universities I asked to was asking, what do I think are the characteristics of social media and mobile media here in India? And there are two things I think Indians have taken further than almost any other group in the world. One is the selfie, and the other is the flash mob. Both of those are complex mixes of social currency and personal mythology. So it's no good taking a selfie if you're not going to share it, right? You take a selfie, leave it in your camera, what's that for? Right? The whole point of a selfie is to pass it along to other people. So while it's very personal, it's also very social. And the flash mob, which reaches a scale here I don't know if it has done, is people are there together, but they're there for a variety of different personal reasons, right? It's not just one thing that we can say this flash mob at the Mumbai train station was all about. We'd have a lot of layers, like we did with my Facebook picture, to understand the nature of those relationships. The same is true of our relationships to brands, right? This is a picture I found on the internet of a bunch of people dressed up like food brands in the US. So there's the Pillsbury Doughboy, the Keebler Cookie Elf, Mr. Peanut. Some of these are brand icons known here, some not. But if you start looking, you will find people dressed every possible consumer product for Halloween, which is our time when we're given permission to dress up. But dressing up is in this way is kind of extreme version of the t-shirts we wear and the things we put on our Facebook page and all of the other ways we wear our brand affiliations. And those, for them, that's both personal mythology and social currency, right? It's a group of friends all decided to dress up like different brands. They chose brands that go together, so forth. So in the business school world, they talk now about brand communities, right? And a brand community is a community, this is like Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge. So Wikipedia says, a community formed on the basis of attachment to a product or brand, an enduring self-selecting group of actors sharing a system of values, standards, and representations, i.e. culture, and recognizing bonds of membership with each other, and a sense of moral responsibility. And I'll come back to that last part a little later. For now, let's just keep in mind the sense of identity, affiliation, shared values that define people's relationship to brands. So in the American context, Harley-Davidson is one of those brands people study. Here in India, it's probably Royal Enfield, right? The motorcycle is one of those things we buy that's an extension of our bodies, of our identities, that comes with social affiliations attached to it, that people become militant about those brands. It's a faith distinction, right? It's an act of religion to value one brand of motorcycle over another. And that's the essence of what we mean by a brand community. In the US, Coke is one of those brands, right? So my brother grew up, and I grew up in Atlanta, where Coke's headquarters is. My brother this is not my brother, but it could be, because he collects Coca-Cola. He's decorated a whole room in his Coca-Cola red. His Christmas tree is done up every year with Coke ornaments. For him, Coke is just an extension of the way he sees himself, the way he sees the city he's from, and so forth. So Coke creates this attachment in people because it's been part of our history for so long. And it's tied to everyday life and memories and family and summer vacations and all of that. Coke becomes a brand people have this affiliation with. American Idol is an interesting, or an Indian Idol in this case. I went to shooting of Indian Idol the other day. Is an interesting blurring of these, right? Because on the one hand, brands are through the Idol franchise, right? In the US, it's how text messaging really, America, was the phone companies sponsored American Idol, and people, and the only way you could vote was to send a text message, and then got a massive number of people using text messaging. So it's an instrument of branding. It's an entertainment franchise, right? You're building up fan following around particular performers. And it's also a civic franchise, and one of my colleagues, Aswin Puntabaker, has written about Indian Idol, regional divisions and divides, and the ways they're expressed by massive rallies of support for Idol contestants here and so forth. So this sense of affiliation around both culture and brand is what makes the Pop Idol franchise worldwide work the ways that it does. So we're moving between brand communities and fan communities as we think about it. Now the sense of social responsibility enters into this. So this is a graphic from something called Not in Harry's Name. And this was a group of Harry Potter fans who are totally passionately connected to Harry Potter, were upset that the studio that runs the amusement parks in Harry Potter's name is selling chocolate that may well be produced by child labor elsewhere in the world, that it's not following fair labor practices, and it's not certified. It hasn't verified that the source of chocolate. And that's a very important political issue for a lot of people. So these fans launched a 4-year campaign challenging the studio that produced the product they're most invested in, saying, you're not valuing Harry Potter, right? A story about children, beloved by children, and we're being asked to eat chocolate that may have been produced by child labor. This is not acceptable. You can't do that in Harry's name. And it becomes a dispute about what can be done in the name of the brand. And they become very public. They call out the studio. And after 4 years, the studio finally backs down last December and announced they're shifting the chocolate contracts and thanking the fans for calling the issue to their attention. Right? So this is brand loyalty, right? Sometimes brands do stupid things that are destructive to their own bottom line, and the most loyal people will call you out on that. So these are not culture jammers and critics. These are your fans who you need to find a way to hold on to as you're working through the future of a brand. Now, Flipkart's in a really fascinating industry in terms of all of this, right? Many of our stereotypes about books are the solitary reader sitting by the fireside, contemplating words on a page. But from the very beginning, print culture was a social culture, right? People gather in cafes, they gather in coffee houses, they have heated discussions with writers. We have book clubs today, online and off. There's all kinds of ways that social media connects with the life of print culture. or media culture, since you deal with media, or any number of other brands that are sold through Flipkart. So Flipkart, whether it thinks of itself that way or not, is in a business of connecting to these brand communities, fan communities, who play a central role in circulating brand messages and reaching a public with your ideas. And various online book dealers, you guys, Amazon, experiment with different mechanisms to have people give their own online reviews, to have an affiliates club where people can post and get revenue sharing. There are a number of different models people have developed to really court that book culture. All right, I skipped over something here, lost a page. Okay. So what I want to talk about now is, and number 4, is this idea of that we should think across media at all times, right? That we're in a world of transmedia production and circulation, which I think is going to be very important as we think about the future of all content that travels through media platforms. Now, the word transmedia by itself simply means across media. So it's an adjective, right? It describes a set of relationships across media platforms. I've mostly been interested in transmedia storytelling or transmedia entertainment. Actually, now I know why that other picture popped up when it did. All right, so transmedia entertainment in Hollywood sense could be a story that spreads across multiple media, and it often involves forms of world building. In India, the Bollywood system has been less about transmedia storytelling and more about transmedia performance. So the song is what travels across media platforms. The song travels in advance of the film. Often the song travels beyond the film as music videos, as recordings that people listen to on the radio, and the song is performed by the audience, right? Lip sync, people learning the songs, learning the dance, performing, making their own videos. And now globally, even in LA, we're seeing people go and take Bollywood dance classes so that they can participate in the thriving culture that Bollywood created. And that's a transmedia culture. It just works on a different set of principles than the world-building principle that Hollywood has tended to follow. When I talked to a veteran screenwriters 10 years ago, at the beginning of the transmedia moment, he said, when I entered the industry, I pitched a story because you had to have a great story to make a great movie. And here I think Casablanca is one of those movies I really love. It's a good story. He said, then I pitched a character because you needed to have a great character to support multiple sequels. Right? Once the sequel becomes the dominant mode of mass production in Hollywood, you need really compelling characters. And I personally like Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare movies. Right? And then, he says, now we pitch a world because a world will support multiple stories involving multiple characters across multiple media platforms. So if you think about Star Wars, this representation of Star Wars isn't a representation of the Anakin and Luke Skywalker saga, a story. It's a representation of a world which has got Jedi, pod racers, and bounty hunters, and TIE fighters, and all kinds of other stuff. And if you think about how Star Wars spread, the films are part of Star Wars, but the books, the toys, the comics, all of that other stuff is part of Star Wars as well. And so Star Wars became the entertainment system because it had an incredible world that we could draw on. Marvel has similarly created a world that's rich and deep. And it's built up pieces over time so that we now at a point where we have, it's from the 60s forward, the characters in Marvel crisscrossed comic books. So Captain America could meet Spider-Man, and the readers would follow their favorite characters across books. Now in film, we've had the ramping up of the Avengers, now 2 waves of the Avenger cycle with individual films feeding into a mass film. We're starting to see the building up of a space opera thing around Guardians of the Universe, and soon Captain Marvel, and there will be other extensions of that side. And we're starting to see a little nook called Hell's Kitchen with Daredevil, and starting this fall, Jessica Jones, and 3 or 4 other series that Netflix has produced that all will explore that. And that allows and then on television, we've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter and so forth. All of that becomes part of this interlocking system where people are consuming media across consuming the story across media, but it adds up to an experience of the whole. And maybe none of us experience all the pieces of media, but that interlocking set of pieces affects the way the media is designed, planned, and executed. Transmedia world building. Now, a world of moving parts, as I've suggested. And part of what the audience does is compare notes, talks among itself, debates the elements of the world. So this is an org chart for the Zion Resistance Army and the Matrix films. Right? People put it together. That information doesn't exist in any given source. The Matrix has three films, about a dozen animated shorts, about 20 comic book stories, about 4 video games, all of which that information comes from and that the people are consolidating. And these become quite complex and sophisticated systems. This is the system of Pokemon, or at least part of the system of Pokemon. Keep in mind, each of those individual characters has powers and weaknesses, friendships, alliances, antagonisms, backstory. As a colleague of mine puts it, this is a system more complex than the periodic table. Right? And no one says to kids, you can't right? But our schools in America don't think you can learn a pantheon of 12 Greek gods. Right? So the sense of a mythology that's big enough, pop culture is demanding complexity in an age of network communication. And figuring it out, whereas education is going the other way. This is X-Men and the relationship between the X-Men. Explains why those of us who weren't reading in the 60s to the 80s are never going to get what's taking place in an X-Men comic. And this, by way of comparison, are the families in War and Peace, which used to be what we thought a complex novel looked like. But in fact, it's a much simpler system that I about horribly and as an undergraduate when I was trying to follow all the characters in War and Peace. Now our kids are Now, what does all of that mean for branding? Well, a colleague of mine, Burkhard Tendrick, has got a book just out on transmedia branding, which I recommend. That comes from the Annenberg University Press. And he sort of argues that brands can attach themselves to stories in 2 ways. And let's see what comes up next. I'm a little nervous. Okay, we get the scaled down version here. So one is through attaching themselves to existing stories. So Gillette Razor, for example, attached itself to the Marvel Avengers universe and did a set of viral videos promising superpowered razors of the future. So created jointly by Gillette and Stark Industries. And we see, the Thor-powered one, this Captain America one where the shield shoots out of the razor and slices your hair and then comes back. I mean, it's a great fun as a video. That strategy works, but it's risky because CoverGirl makeup attached itself to Hunger Games and promised the colors of the Capitol is their campaign. Well, if you're a Hunger Games fan, the Capitol is the bad guys. Right? You don't want to identify your brand with the bad guys in a narrative, especially a narrative about class warfare. Right? So, bad mistake, and they got a lot of hits on the internet for not understanding the mythology they're working with well enough to do it. So the flip side is you build your own mythology, right? You create a world. Happiness Factory for Coke would be a good example of a brand that has built a world, a mythology. And Coke has been doing this well for the last 90 years. So the American Santa Claus is part of a mythology that Coca-Cola created. Santa wasn't necessarily wearing a red suit before Coke came along. The idea of leaving a soft drink out for Santa was not something American kids did before Coke came along. The Coke effectively branded the most sacred holiday in the Christian tradition in the United States through building up a mythology that now extends to the polar bears and any number of other things that Coke has built up. So Coke as a brand is building its own mythology. And the same has happened for McDonald's, Taco Bell, any number of the fast food companies in the US are now building quite elaborate mythologies around different products, you can tap into with each new commercial. And you have a cumulative effect of a story that builds enthusiasm and builds a brand community over time. All right, so those are some of the big ideas. I'm going to suggest, I wanted to hold on some time for questions. And But if you want to read up more on some of these ideas, these are the 3 books I recommend most, beyond the Transmedia branding book that just came out. This is my book, Spreadable Media, Creating Value and Meaning in a Network Culture, which I wrote with Sam Ford, who's a public relations guy, and Joshua Green, who's in the advertising industry. Grant McCracken, who's an anthropologist who consults with major brands in the US, has a book called Chief Culture Officer, which essentially argues that inside every corporation, you need an executive or a team of people who really are monitoring the culture and keeping root of the kinds of things I'm talking about here. And then Robert Kuznets has just joined our faculty at USC, has a methodology book called Netnography, which is about monitoring the web, combining qualitative and quantitative tools to develop a rich picture of fan behavior, brand communities, and so forth through the networks. What people are saying about your brand, and you can plan how to respond to it. So to wrap this up, these are, it says 5, there are actually 4 takeaways here to think about as you think about your company or brand, any branded company in the digital moment. First is you want to give people a chance to participate in ways in the life of your brand. And book readers are going to want to participate in conversations about books. That's part of what goes on. Part of what going to a really good bookstore is you're talking to the people next to you, you're talking to the clerk, you're getting insights and information. And online book dealers find ways to approximate that and build that into the ways they do business. Secondly, you want to embrace and facilitate the spread of media content. I mean, you don't want to give away the store, literally, but you do want to create a context where people have the resources they need to talk about you, to spread your messages, to engage in conversations around you. And that means recognizing that as spreadable media, not simply viral media, and understanding how those communities work in such a way to enhance the value of your brand. Third, recognize people engage with brands for multiple reasons. And we've identified this idea of personal mythology and social currency for thinking about what some of those reasons are, but there are many others. And 4, ensure people can access brands and services across media, and often you build that relationship by building up content which rewards them for seeking you out across multiple media platforms, whether it's Bollywood songs traveling across the culture, or Hollywood and Marvel's story worlds, or brands that are building relationships and mythologies across media. Those are all ways of not just saying we'll be where the consumer is, but encouraging consumers to seek you out again and again across a broad range of different contact points. So with that, I will open it up to the floor for questions, comments, whatever.
I'm just wondering, do you want to play the videos and see if they play, all the videos?
Well, it's too late.
We can play them again. We can have some time.
Well,
because I thought they'd be fun just to see the Batman and some of the ads while we get questions. They have someone who can help us play the videos.
Well,
It might be just fun for them to see
All right, well,
the Batman one or whatever.
okay, so let's see what we can do.
If you have a question, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll come to you with my question. And that's more fun. I'll ask you deep personal things.
I have two more questions from other locations.
So what? And they're here?
Yeah, you'll have to read out these.
Okay.
So we take these just to be fair.
Sure. Okay, good. Yeah, so you can just watch it. Yeah, so okay, fine. We'll send you links later. So these are some of the questions, the 2 questions that have come
We've
up.
got some questions that are sent in. Great. So what are the various repercussions of the prosumer concept, if any, on a direct buy-sell relationship of e-commerce? All right, so the idea of prosumer comes out of Alvin Toffler's work, the third wave. And he's sort of talking about people that are semi-professional consumers and producers of content. And so this is another way of thinking about what I'm calling participatory culture, right? It's much more interested in that line between amateur and professional. In some ways, we're at a moment where, in fact, there are more categories than that. So that there are amateurs, there are semi-professionals, there are activists, there are religious groups, there are educators, there are governmental forces, all producing and sharing media with each other. One way that people have talked about prosumers are as lead users. That is, people who are the early adapters and adopters of any new product, right? That they're people that get out in front of something, that they're people that companies are actively courting. So something like Lego is actively... So Lego has actively courted its consumer, most hardcore, literally seeking their advice on bricks, sending them bricks in advance of their release, encouraging a much more collaborative relationship between the brand and its elite consumers. The Lego fans then become lead advocates for the brand when it launches into the culture. So the spreadable media practices I'm talking about get fueled by these lead users who have been empowered and feel connected to the brand. And in that sense, that does shift their sell relationship, right? Insofar as the brand now has a direct gateway to the consumer who is consuming products in advance of their being for sale. It means the consumer becomes an active advocate. It affects for the brand. That's a new kind of collaborative relationship that's emerged. And I think that's a really important area to pay attention to. Maybe less for companies that are middlemen, that are selling brands, but even there, as you're rolling out new services, new opportunities, new product lines, then it becomes figuring out how to relationship with your strongest advocates is really important. And you could argue that something like Amazon's affiliates program, where if I join the affiliates program and I blog about an Amazon book and I include a link to that book on my blog, and someone follows that link back to Amazon and buys the book and buys other books on the same purchase, I get a percentage of that revenue. Right? That arrangement is one that makes it very easy for me to affiliate with Amazon. And in fact, Amazon on that gives me a better deal than my own publisher does on my book. I get more percentage as an Amazon affiliate than I get as an author from a particular press. So that set of relationship encourages the prosumer to be out advocating for particular products in Amazon. And Amazon doesn't have to care whether they're advocating positively or negatively as long as it's getting the message out about the brand everywhere they go. So those kinds of relationships are illustrative of the moment we're talking about. All right, the sets of content creators, sellers, and content consumers, buyer, remain largely disjointed currently. Is this dynamic expected to change in the future? It's an interesting question. If we look at someplace like Etsy or eBay, we probably come away with a different impression of what the relationship between sellers and buyers look like than if we go through some sort of different kind of aggregative system. When I buy a book on your site or Amazon and it comes from an individual dealer, I don't much care who that dealer is or where in the country they are. I may look at their reputation if that information is available to me, and I may decide, is this someone who's got a reasonably good rate, and I'll buy it from them rather than the other guys offering in the same price, but ultimately I don't. My wife collects 10 times 19th century photographs on eBay. She follows particular buyers, sellers who are likely to make product available on a regular basis. She's forged a much closer relationship. And by the time you get to Etsy, which my grad student Samantha Close has been studying, looking at these craftspeople who form ongoing relationships with communities of consumers, craftspeople buying each other's work, so forth. So Etsy, the head of community relations there is a woman named Vanessa Bertozzi, who's a former student of mine, really works very, very hard to build up a less alienated, less fragmented relationship between sellers and buyers. Etsy's still a middleman company at the end of the day, but they've seen their value in creating something that fits the crafter community, where there's an expectation of a sort of relationship between a craftsperson and the person who's buying the handmade object. Hello.
Yeah, there's one here. So.
Okay.
Hi. So in India, organized retail is not as big as in other countries, and Flipkart is functioning as a space to buy products, and consumers who've never been exposed to brands come here for the first time. And brands are trying to share their messages. As Flipkart, sort of a middleman facilitator, the question is, how do we allow brands and their people who consume information about brands onto and discover content about the brand? So any thoughts on that? Because I think it will work a little different in the US.
Yeah, I should begin by saying that I tried going book shopping in Delhi the other day and physical retail stores, and I have now a much greater appreciation of what Flipkart is bringing to India, right? I just wanted to buy some basic Indian graphic novels, and the stores were so disarrayed, and there was no consistency of what was in stock and what wasn't. And I came home and put my order in Flipkart, and they were looking for was right there. So I definitely see the order, the coherence that you're bringing potentially to book buying in India as an incredible step forward for any about reading and print culture and ideas. That I think Flipkart's doing some incredibly good work. Now, so I don't know all of the details of the business model here, and so I'm reluctant to get too deep into specific advice. But I think the idea of brands helping to facilitate discussions around topics that are significant to them seems like a good way to go, right? This is not a place where the brand is just indifferently situated on a site, but rather the brand wants to be connected with a set of discussions. And this is what brands are doing more generally in an age of brand communities, right? So some companies, and we mentioned motorcycles, I mentioned soft drinks, become part of our identities. Other brands have to struggle. So tampon brands, for example, in the US have attached themselves to women's reproductive health issues, have attached themselves to women's sports, have encouraged self-empowerment discourses, are finding a variety of ways that the brand is joined with a conversation that particular communities want to have, and those communities overlap with the communities that their product do, right? If they can reach women when women are talking about reproductive health, then they're in a space where the brand's message gets heard differently, and the brand gets seen as a benefactor of those conversations. But that's a very different model of branding than we're going to interrupt your favorite TV show and hold you hostage until you listen to our message, right? Which is the broadcast era, mass culture version of ads, where it's not targeted to us personally, it's not meaningful as a resource. The brand doesn't really care whether I like it or not, whether I'm watching or not, well, a little bit. But it's going to just dominate. It's like Arnab talking its way over us until we either change the channel, mute it, or over and we can get back to the show we're willing to watch. And that's very different from an ad in an age of spreadable media, where in fact I choose to pass your message on to my friends. But only if that message is engaging, meaningful, clever, a resource that I want to use for a particular kind of conversation I'm going to have. So you're in a business where you've got the content, in a way, the books, the media, the products people want to be engaging with, how to connect that to those conversations in a way that brands may benefit from the discussions that are also taking place around books, around movies, around DVDs and CDs and so forth, is the interesting challenge there. But I think this, and I don't know that I have the answer. If I did, I'd start my own company probably. But what I do know is that you've got to be attentive to the social behavior of your consumers and why they're involved in conversations that include you and includes the brands that are choosing to advertise or affiliate themselves with your site.
There's a mic here if anyone wants. I can pass it along. Yeah. Can you pass it? That would be hard to.
Hello. Wow. Okay. As you mentioned earlier about brands staying around long enough that they build that sort of loyalty and indemnity, like the Royal Enfield, being an Enfield rider myself, I'm sort of facing this dilemma with the brand. It's like how Harvey Dent says in Batman. He says you either die a hero or you hang around long enough to become the villain.
Yeah.
So with the new sort of Enfields rolling out, that sort of DIY culture of owning a cast iron vehicle has died. And now it has become a showroom vehicle where people just go up and purchase it like any other bike. And they're not on the technological front as compared to some of the European bikes that are coming in now, like KTM and Benelli and all of these guys. So how does a brand assess that point in their lives or in their products' lives to wean off or to reinvent themselves?
We understand this if we're thinking about a pop star, right? That the pop star on the rise develops a fan following of people who think they're totally authentic because they discovered them and no one else knows. And they reach a certain tipping point where they suddenly become popular with a larger culture and people's response is they totally sold out, right? So that moment of authenticity that gives way to inauthenticity, when your fan following as a niche becomes something else. And to some degree, all brands undergo this process, right? That an online book dealer, shall we say, whichever one we're thinking about in a given moment, starts as a hip brand, right? It's either the first internet book company in the case of Amazon or a company that's India-based that's trying to compete with an American company. Either way, you've got a certain hip image as you're starting out that people want to affiliate with, and there's that sense of discovery. Have you tried Flipkart? Have you tried this bike? And then those people absolutely help you spread, but then you reach a point where those can be your harshest critics because it's no longer their exclusive property anymore, right? And that's to some degree what happens to the kind of brand you're talking about. Along the way, then as you go mass, then certain things that were interesting and niche about you to begin with, you have to shed in order to be successful. So the company that's mass can't innovate as fast as a company that's niche because it can't charge as much for its products, say. And that becomes a kind of vicious cycle. Now, it depends then which community do you depend on, or which communities do you depend upon for your success? You probably don't want to alienate the hardcore cult consumers of the brand, right? They have been your major advocate all along and potentially your lead users who bring lots of value to that relationship. So when they critique you, you want to listen to it. But you want to listen while recognizing the charge of inauthentic is such an apt one to come at that moment that you've got to get beneath it. What is it they're frustrated with? And you're saying, not enough technological innovation. That's an interesting insight that as a company you could look at and say, all right, we need to do something with the next cycle that breaks with the pattern that people are not expecting, that gives people a new reason to be excited about the brand's existence. And if you can't do that, then you're probably in trouble. If you can do that, and you're like Apple that magically produces the next iProduct everyone wants to consume, that moment could be a tipping point where a company that was, Apple was middling until the iPod came out, and then suddenly it's hit one stride after another. So you can find your footing again, but you probably need to find it in dialogue with those hardcore supporters that have been there all along, because they will, if they don't like you, they'll kill you. So a couple of weeks back, San Diego Comic-Con, which I go to most years, 170,000 of the biggest fans of mass culture in the US gather in one place. They've all got Twitter accounts. The networks put out their pilots for the fall of anything science fiction, fantasy related, and people tweet. And their show's already dead on arrival. They never reached television before. The word of mouth coming out of Comic-Con was so tragic that probably they're not going to be seen by the majority of people. Each of those fans reaches on average 20 or 30 other consumers who will either turn up or turn off, depending on what the message they got from those fans coming out. So that's where social media power really is something you've got to pay attention to and work with in the modern environment. Yes, back there.
Hi. So something related